All right, we're going to continue our discussion on ways that a company can raise capital. So, in the past chapter, the way that we raised capital was by issuing stock. So a company, if they wanted to raise additional money, they would issue stock. In other words, they would give away some ownership and they would receive money for that. And then if they chose to later on, they could pay dividends, but they weren't obligated to. All right, so that is one way to raise capital. You can issue stock just like we did in the previous chapter. This way, in chapter 14, is going to be by issuing bonds. Bonds are different than stock because bonds have to be paid back in full. So it's actually a long-term liability. You'll see it on the balance sheet as bonds payable. So what happens is a company issues a bond and the bondholder pays the sum, say $100,000, and then every 6 months the company pays them interest on that bond, and then at the end of the term, say 10 years, the company will pay back the entire amount, the $10,000 bond. So that's the way that a bond works. Now, when a company is deciding that they need additional capital, they're going to look at different scenarios to decide if it's best to issue common stock or preferred stock or bonds or some combination of all three. So that's the first thing that we're going to do, starting on page 626, is see how to set up these plans and see which one is most beneficial for the company. All right, so on page 626, it gives us 3 plans. The first plan, in all of them plans, you're going to want $4 million. So let's just say that the company wants to expand and they need $4 million to do that. Let me get some commas so I can see what I've got going on here. So in each of these 3 scenarios, I need $4 million. So the question is, how do I get that $4 million? Do I want to issue bonds? Do I want to issue stock, preferred, or common? All right, so in plan 1, we are going to issue stock, the $10 par common stock, for the entire amount. That's plan 1 that we're going to be looking at. Plan 2, we're going to issue some preferred and some common. So we're going to do $2 million. And again, the problem has to give you this part. And in plan 3, we're going to issue $2 million of bonds and $1 million of the stocks, and then we're going to see which one comes out beneficial. All right, so in each of these, the total that we're going to be raising, wait, this should be $1 million, will equal to the $4 million that we need to raise. All right, now, how do we tell if it's beneficial? There's lots of different things to look at. We could look at how much are we going to have to pay in interest. We could look at how much each common stockholder will earn per share. We could look at bottom line net income. But in this problem, we're going to be looking at earnings per share. So let's talk about what earnings per share is. Earnings per share, otherwise known as EPS, is going to be calculated like this. Net income less the preferred dividends, all divided by number of common shares outstanding. All right, what that's going to tell is what is the earnings of that company per share of common stock. Okay, so it looks very similar to what you did in the previous chapter where you did dividends per share when you did your calculation, but this is going to be net earnings of the company per share. All right, I'm looking for my divided by sign. There we go. All right, so that's what we're going to ultimately be looking at. Okay, so plan 1, where did we say we're going to get the money from? By issuing the common stock at $10, right? So that's going to be right here, $4 million. And that gives us a total of $4 million. All right, and plan 2, we said that we're going to have some preferred stock and some common stock. And that's going to give us our $4 million. And in plan 3, we're going to do some bonds and some common and preferred. Okay. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to figure out what our earnings before interest and income tax are. The problem has to tell you this. So the problem will say that the earnings are expected to be, and in this situation, it's $800,000. That'll be the same across the board. And then things are going to start changing. Interest on bonds. We don't have any bonds in Plan 1, so therefore there will be no interest. So the answer will be 0 for this one, right? Plan 2, we also did not issue any bonds, so there's no interest to deduct on Plan 2. Plan 3, we did have some bonds. They were 12% bonds. We're going to be looking at this whole plan on an annual basis, so we can just say $2 million worth of bonds times the 12% annual interest rate, and that gives us our interest expense for the year. So we'll say equals 2 million times 0.12, and that gives us $240,000 a year for interest that we have to pay to those bondholders. Alright, at this point we're going to calculate income before income taxes. This number right here is just earnings minus the interest on bonds. So for this one, it's 800,000 minus 0, so it's 800,000. Same thing for this one. And for this one, it's going to be 800,000 minus what we have to pay out in interest. So our income before income taxes will be less for Plan 3. Now we're going to do income tax. The problem will have to tell you what the tax bracket is, and I believe it's probably going to be 35% if I were to guess, but let me look for it in the book. Oh, it's 40%. They must be including the state income tax rate. Generally, the top rate for corporations for federal tax is 35%, and then the general rate for states, although it can change, is 5%. It is 5% for Mississippi. All right, so they tell us to use 40%. So we're going to say 800,000 times 0.40, and that's going to be our income tax expense, equals 800,000 times 0.40. All right, and it's going to be the same thing, 800,000 times 0.40, and here it's going to be less because we got to reduce our net income by that bond interest, so it's going to be 560,000 times 0.40, so our interest expenses, our income tax expense will be less. Now we get to net income. This is net income after bond interest expense and after income tax expense. So our bottom line net income is this right here. Alright, now what we're going to do is we're trying to get down to that earnings per share, and remember that's net income minus preferred dividends divided by number of shares outstanding. So we need to calculate our dividends on our preferred stock. So how do we do that? We're going to look and we're going to see that this was preferred stock 9%, $50 par. Alright, to calculate dividends, if you remember from chapter 12, dividends on preferred stock equal number of shares times the percent that they promise you, it's 9% there, times the par value. Alright, we can see our percent and we can see our par, but right now we can't see our number of shares. However, we can get that by saying 2 million divided by 50, because remember, we only ever put preferred stock down at par value. Alright, so we can calculate our number of shares of preferred stock by saying 2 million, this is for Plan 2 anyway, divided by the $50. And when we do that, we get 40,000 shares of stock. Alright, so let's come down here. Here, how much dividends do we have? It's a trick question because why? We have no preferred stock, so there are no dividends on preferred stock. Alright, Plan 2. We have 40,000 shares, right here, times 9% times 50. Alright, so I get 180,000 of dividends on preferred stock. Plan 3, we need to go and figure out how many number of shares we have again. And this time, we'll say 1,000,000 divided by 50. So for plan 3, it's going to be equals 1,000,000 divided by 50. So it's going to be 20,000 shares of preferred stock for plan 3. And this is shares of preferred stock for plan 2. All right, so coming down here, now we're going to say 20,000 times 9% times 50. And it's going to be half, which makes sense since here we had $2 million worth of preferred stock, and here we have half that at $1 million. All right, so our preferred dividends are now 90,000. Okay, so that gives me available for dividends on common stock. This means the net income that is available for dividends on common stock. So it'll be 480 minus 0 is equal to 480. And then it'll be 480 minus 180. And then it will be 336 minus 90. So that's my available net income for dividends on common stock. Now let's look at my shares of common stock outstanding. We're going to do this much in the same way. We're going to look and we're going to say, we know that common stock is only listed ever at par. And so if in plan 1 we have $4 million worth of common stock, if we divide that by the par, that tells me the number of shares outstanding. So therefore I'm going to say 4 million divided by 10. That's going to tell me my number of shares. Here I'll say 2 million divided by 10. That's going to tell me that I have 200,000 shares. And here I'll say 1 million divided by 10. And that's going to tell me that I have 100,000. So therefore my earnings per share, which is net income minus preferred dividends, this one right here, divided by number of shares outstanding. That's earnings per share. So let's see what it looks like. And it's probably rounding, so let me get rid of some rounding here. Add some decimals. So in this plan, which one has the highest earnings per share? Plan 3 has the highest earnings per share. Now, if we changed some minor numbers, or even a major number such as earnings before interest and income tax, let's just see what would happen to our earnings per share. So instead of making 800,000, let's say that this company made 440,000. Now what happens to our earnings per share? The calculation continues down, and it automatically calculates because I put formulas in everywhere. So I get 60 cents per share, 42 cents per share, and 30 cents per share. So now which one has a higher earnings per share? Plan 1 does. So anytime you change a variable, it's going to change the end result. So if you make a model such as this with formulas, then you can go in there and put in different scenarios and help a company decide what's the best way to raise capital.